All right, everyone. The other day, Donald Trump was talking about the possibility that the United States could leave NATO. I do not actually support this. Now, up front, I do not believe he's actually serious about it. What he's trying to do, he's making a bunch of big asks right now. Like when he says Canada is going to be the 51st state, or we're going to buy Greenland and stuff. This is to pressure other countries by effectively swinging our diplomatic dick around. I don't think any of these suggestions, other than with the Panama Canal, are actually serious. And by the way, that's the one I would actually seriously support. You build a canal, then inept politicians decide to abandon it. And then the country that's hosting the canal starts abusing you on trade. Sort of makes sense to stage an intervention at that point. With NATO, I've got a different suggestion. I am pro-NATO, but it needs to be reformed. Number one, the countries in NATO need to pull their weight. Now, most of them at this point are, actually. Record number of countries, link in the description archived, of course, are actually meeting their GDP spending goals. Number two, it needs to be reiterated unequivocally that it is a defensive alliance. It is not an alliance that's made to imperialize, invade other countries, etc. It's an alliance that's meant for simply defensive purposes. A lot of people, I think, they just don't understand that the intent of NATO was as a counterbalance to the Eastern Bloc to say we will stand together. If the United States were to leave NATO, it would collapse. What you would end up with, and this is the problem, is you would end up with the various larger European powers that were in NATO vying for power. When major European powers start fighting one another, usually we end up getting dragged into a war. The problem is the Eastern Bloc or some other power, fucking the Arabians at this point, might come in and fill the power vacuum. So that'd be a bad idea. And finally, another thing the United States needs to do is it needs to focus more on its hemisphere for the Americas. Under the Monroe Doctrine, this is our hemisphere. We're the lords of it. We're the ones that are going to defend the sovereignty of other nations. Most people don't realize this, but the second biggest defense alliance in the entire world is the United States and various Latin American countries, which have come and gone over time. So we should definitely focus on that. NATO is perfectly fine, but that's mostly, that's a Euro affair more than anything else. It's to secure the support of the European people. But our bigger alliance, and in the future I believe much bigger economically and diplomatically, is really in Latin America and East Asia more than anything else. The United States has to secure trade and shipping security, for example, over most of the world. Most countries are not capable of securing shipping. We've got the world's massively, disproportionately largest navy, for example. This is important for NATO, but it's also important in other parts of the world. So the fact that we prioritize NATO over every other alliance that we're in maybe doesn't make so much sense as saying we have a trilateral alliance system. We have NATO, which is mainly Europe. We have the Monroe Doctrine and our continuing resolution with other countries in Latin America. That's our own hemisphere. We've got to safeguard that at all hazards. And then we've got our alliance, our pan-alliance with Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, the Philippines, I believe Malaysia, and certain other countries in East Asia. And by doing this, we've created a huge defensive shield around the United States that is virtually impenetrable. We're safeguarding the liberty of other people, and that's point number 4. One of the outreaches that the United States should be doing, but currently is not, is to encourage the ability of people in allied nations to own firearms, to defend themselves effectively. Whatever gun control methodology they happen to use, therefore would be secondary. We should be encouraging them to arm up. Like when Russia invaded Crimea, the Polish got nervous. Even though they're in NATO, again, they would be able to invoke articles and everyone else would curb stomp Russia and then nuclear war would break out. We're trying to prevent that from happening. I don't want to see any wars. The Polish wisely decided to arm the population and start giving them like rifle training and stuff like that. That was the right thing to do. You see the European countries, after Trump threatened them and said, well, maybe we'll leave NATO, all of a sudden, they started spending more money on their militaries. And, I mean, it didn't hurt things that Russia decided to reinvade Ukraine a second time. And they started getting nervous. And we'll see what happens with that diplomatic kerfuffle. I have a feeling that Trump will be able to solve that problem fairly quickly. It won't be on day one, but negotiations will begin on day one. Biden will probably try to stymie it and then sabotage things on his way out the door. He's been doing that a lot over these last few weeks. That's what we should do with NATO. We should focus on it. We should stay in the alliance, expand it if possible. But we also need to look at our own hemisphere, our own self-interest, and also our allies on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. Like right now, China, for example, is sort of staring down the Taiwanese. We need to do more about that. Simply giving them some missiles and a ship or something like that is really not going to be terribly helpful. We need to iterate complete support for Taiwan and say, look, if we're going to have a one China policy, you're going to have to sign off on the sovereignty of this island or something like that. We need to swing our diplomatic dick around. The hope is that if you swing your diplomatic dick around, you don't have to swing your military dick around. But we do have to make it clear to the world that our military dick is way larger than yours, to the point where you can dock inside of it if you really want to. I do not believe in imperialism. I do not believe in warmongering. But I do believe in protecting our friends. Because who else is going to fucking do it? There's no other military power capable of doing so. Who are you going to look to? The British? The British Navy is like one aircraft carrier. And it's got a ramp, by the way. The French, that's a little bit better, ironically enough. The Germans, they're beginning to rearm. Ultimately, in Europe, you're looking at Poland and 1,200 Greek tanks and stuff like that. Turkey, which is hysterical because they sort of straddle the fence because of their geographic location. You'd be looking more to Egypt or Turkey probably than some of the European powers. Most of them haven't fully rearmed. They're getting there. Trump is simply trying to pressure them to do so. I don't think it's a serious suggestion to actually leave NATO. It would leave a gaping power vacuum that would destabilize the entire Western world. While I do believe in focusing mostly on our own hemispheric issues, I also believe we should remain in NATO, but it needs reform. And the United States needs to reassert hegemony in NATO as well and say, look, we've got an agreement, 2% of GDP. Some of the countries are above that. I think Poland is like at 3% or something. Some of your military spending needs to be diverted to specifically NATO-based purposes. That's so that we can all protect one another. It makes sense. We've created the world's largest alliance. It's like the Delian League on steroids. But you need to actually pony up the resources because we can't do it alone. It's not physically possible. We don't have the means. We've got veterans sleeping out under highway underpasses right now. Pull some more of your own weight so we can divert some of our own funding because our military is disproportionately massive. And hopefully we can take care of things at home. Because if we do destabilize, let's say commies take over because of public discontent, the alliance will fall. So charity starts at home. Please help us. You've all got big economies anyway, and we'll figure it out. The rest we can figure out later. So I don't think we're going to leave NATO, and I would never support leaving NATO. It would be a terrible idea. Thankfully, I don't believe it's a serious suggestion. I think it's to pressure other countries. That's about all. Peace out.